This is Cosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Cosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast. And I think we're going to be continuing on the Ep079, the wildfires.
The wildfires.
Did I get that term right, Randall?
Cosmic Firestorm.
Do we need to start over? Did I screw the show up right at the very beginning?
Well, you did. I don't know if we need to start over. I mean, we can just leave it in there as...
proof that I'm an idiot. We can do that.
Right.
Yeah,
I didn't want to say that, but you read my mind.
Ep079. There it is.
Ep079.
There it is.
I think that's correct.
Yeah.
Of course, I've been proven wrong before.
How often does that happen?
Yeah. Once.
Well, I recall that I misspoke. I think it was 1976. I was I got mixed up about something.
So we were, I guess, last time we were just about to start diving into the Chicago fire. Is that where we're going today?
The Great Chicago Fire.
Right.
Mrs. O'Leary's cow.
Right.
I don't know. You think it was Mrs. O'Leary's cow? You think who was at fault?
Been skeptical of that story since I read about it. Yeah.
Well, as a matter of fact,
she was a scape cow.
It's utter BS.
Yes, escape cow, but not entirely. There may be an element of truth to it. We'll just have to wait. Have to wait and see how the story unfolds.
I can see what you might be hinting at there. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I got it.
Oh, okay. All right.
It's in the new dance music video featuring Randall and the team.
Oh,
is it? Okay.
Yeah, but after I watched it, I thought something's missing from it, and then I realized, of course, Mike's not in it. Normal guy, of course,
replaced by Graham.
Yeah, replaced by Graham. Yeah. Okay, I got to give a shout out to that.
Wanjo sound.
Wanjo sound. Yeah, way to go, man. Hey. Somebody in one of the comments said, "Hey, are you dissing Randall, man?"
I saw that, yeah.
And
nope.
Yeah, you better stop dissing me there, Juan.
Brad, did you star in The Perfectionist? Pretty sure I saw you in that movie.
Must have been an alternate life there.
I always get those two messed up. Nice glasses.
Yeah, that's it. It was The Professional.
Oh, okay, The Professional.
Yeah.
All right.
They're a little too green. I would like them to be more black.
So Brad's about to be engulfed in a solar storm, it looks like, or sucked into
this, yeah.
Well, just
it's
hang
the
on
wildest
until the
wildfire
over.
I could get, so I thought that was like maxed out. Cosmic firestorm right there.
That is a cosmic firestorm, all right. Wow.
That's a sunspot? Is that what that is?
That's what it looks like,
It looks like a sunspot over there. Yeah.
Looks like a sunspot to me.
Yeah. Nice.
Ooh, we're going to have some, do a couple of shows on the sun. I have been getting some really interesting, cool stuff on the last year or two that I think make a little bit more sense. I put a little bit more of it together, and then we definitely should talk about the sun. For multiple reasons.
Sure.
Reasons. Well, yeah, but I am the supreme dictator, but occasionally when I'm in a benign mood, I will allow a more democratic approach.
That's what Brad says, but at the end of the day, he can cut anything out that he wants or choose not to publish.
Right. He says it's your show because he knows that he has the final say.
Come on, Brad.
Okay.
Especially with
that explains a lot.
Computer that's coming.
Oh man,
I'm gonna rip it apart and
that's right.
Multi versions. I'm gonna Be under
Yeah,
pressure,
so-
but there's going to be a lot more coming out, people.
Thanks to all the support from everybody.
no shit.
Brad's getting a new computer. Editing is going to be so much faster and easier for him. That's going to be a massive workload.
That's right.
Easier
Grazie.
taken
Grazie.
off. So
Brad is getting an upgrade.
That's right.
thanks for all the support, everybody.
That's right.
Very much
Dude,
so. Dr.
Thanks to the
Shane.
support, we were able to build him a custom machine that is very upgradable as well, so we can continue to make it more and more capable as time
So
goes on.
he's getting some muscle.
That's right. That's right.
All right.
Light speed.
All right. So so we were talking about let's circle back, kind of pick up the thread a little bit. We were talking about Ep079, the cosmic firestorms that have made their way into the common mythology of humankind. And we talked about the Great Miramichi Fire in New Brunswick. Now, before we proceed further, Kyle, do you remember the date? I know it's been a few weeks, so I'm not going to be too hard on you if you don't remember.
I thought it was October 8th. Is that right?
You're close. No, you're
Is it the
close.
9th? Okay, no, I'm further out.
The other
It was
way.
at 9 p.m. in
That's right.
October,
No,
a
no.
date very close to the 8th of October at 9 p.m.
It was close to the 8th of October.
Okay.
First,
The 7th
The
of
7th.
October.
Oh,
Okay.
well.
That's about as close as you can get. I mean, one day earlier.
Well, I was thinking of the people in Australia. They thought it was the 8th.
Okay. And we learned that on that 7th of October, the Miramichi country was not alone with its troubles. You remember that? Far to the south on the St. John River, clearing fires that had been unattended for weeks and probably months destroyed the town of Fredericton. So, and also another detail to refresh our minds. William Coney, apparently an eyewitness to portions of the great fires along the Miramichi, said that on the 7th, a sickly mist, tinged with purple, emerged from the forest and settled over everything. And then, Kyle, as you said, around 9 o'clock, a succession of loud roars thundered through the forest. Peal after peal, crash after crash, announced the sentence of destruction.
That's right.
Now, that's an interesting detail to me. The sickly mist tinged with purple that emerged from the forest and settled over everything.
So
And
just
then-
quick geographic reminder here. We're in the maritime province of New Brunswick, which is
Yes.
just northeast of Maine.
Just northeast of Maine, that's right. Thanks, Brad. That's a good point to make. It is not difficult to understand how many people thought all of New Brunswick was on fire, and much of Nova Scotia and Maine. As one quaint old account has it, the whole forest world appeared to be in flames. And then, said one unnamed poet who went through it, it was a terrifying night. All it required to complete a picture of the general judgment was the blast of a trumpet, the voice of the archangel, and the resurrection of the dead. So that's what we kind of covered. We covered this fire, and just to review a few of the details, because we want to be able to see if there's any commonalities between these various fires that we're looking at here. So we're going to move on a few years. We're going to jump ahead to 1871. And what happened on October 8th, 1871? So we'll maybe back up a little and pick it up where we left off. I think we covered these slides, but we'll just do it quickly again. So, firestorms caused major havoc in North America during the 19th century. No one had the means to predict when and where one would occur. After all, fires broke out daily for years in Chicago prior to Mrs. O'Leary's obstinate cow supposedly kicking over a lantern. To really appreciate these fires in context, we have to look at what was considered sort of par for the course at the time. There were constantly in the forest, for example, fires, small fires burning, sometimes clearing fires. In the cities, there were, even in Chicago, there were fires that, Chicago had a fire department and they were putting out fires. But here's the thing. The kind of climatic conditions prevailed on the Chicago evening of 8th of October, 1871, were hot and oppressively muggy with a brisk southwestern wind. Now, that was not that unusual during what they called Indian summer in the Midwest. But the O'Leary fire, which we can call it the O'Leary fire, differed because, for unknown reasons, its convection tower fought up through the inversion and became a wave of flames. Now, we know what a temperature inversion is.
That's when there are layers of like different temperatures in the atmosphere as you go up.
Typically, normally you're
warmer up high.
Exactly. That's the thing. And sometimes it'll become a denser layer that forms a cap, right? And it can trap, like if there's any pollutants in the atmosphere, like if you have a temperature inversion over a city, it can trap pollutants near the ground, right? Fogs will occur during a temperature inversion, right? Because it's trapping the moisture near the ground instead of allowing it. Okay, so you had it's important, I think, to understand that there was a temperature inversion. Temperature inversions will depress or suppress convection movement of air currents, right? So now what this is saying is that its convection tower fought up through the inversion. So once it's almost like the inversion is keeping the lower atmosphere under greater pressure, right? Now it busts up through, because now when the fire starts, what happens? You got a lot of energy, thermal energy, below the cap layer, right? So now that allows, boom, to bust through. So now you get this upwelling, this updraft of air, right? So now it's sweeping the fire up with it. So the O'Leary fire differed because, for unknown reasons, its convection tower fought up through the inversion and became a wave of flames that moved across the Windy City, burning the downtown district and the docks and destroying over 40,000 dwellings. 46 years earlier, almost to the day, on the 7th of October, 1825, a similar fire ravaged New Brunswick in the Maritimes, burning 10,000 out of 25,000 miles of territory. So that's 10,000 miles is going to be...
What year was that one?
1825. So that's 6,400,000 acres. That's a pretty significant forest fire. And it did it all within 2 days. So I want to put this into perspective when we're talking about forest fires, because, we're being told that we've been having unprecedented forest fires in the last couple of years. So 10,000 miles, that's 6,400,000 acres. Now that's a massive fire to consume a lot of territory within just a couple of days. For days prior to the disaster, fires in the forests and air charged with wood smoke had caused little apprehension, considered a necessary part of land clearance projects. With startling suddenness, the flames merged in mid-morning into a most impetuous hurricane that quickly did its terrible work. Now that hurricane, you can think of you can attribute that to the this rapidly rising convection current, Okay, so we've established that 46 years, almost to the day, Chicago fire, right? And this is from the book The Wall of Flames by Lawrence H. Larson, published by the North Dakota Institute for Regional Studies. Wall of Flames. So he's talking about what he calls the O'Leary fire, the Chicago fire, and I kind of like that, the O'Leary fire. It differed from other fires because, for unknown reasons, its convection tower fought up through the inversion and became a wave of flames that moved across the Windy City, burning the downtown district and the docks and destroying over 40,000 dwellings. Now, did we get the covered about an inversion? What happens?
Yeah.
Kyle, that you did get that absolutely
And I'm
right.
kind of getting that because the inversion layer, the warmer layer up high would be a high pressure zone. And so the fire also being high pressure would run into that like a wall.
Yep.
And typically
And then
spread out underneath it, but it actually broke through that high pressure zone.
Yes.
That's cool.
I'm trying to picture that and I'm guessing at that point it's just because the air has presumably accumulated enough heat that it is now hotter than the cap air, the air forming the cap, I guess.
Yeah, and it has to have enough heat to make it all the way through the entire inversion layer before
and
cooling
once it
down.
does that, it sort of punches a hole through it, and now it can just suck that air up.
Because above that it's going to be another low pressure zone.
Yes.
So that's
Wow.
That's interesting.
It is interesting. For days prior to the disaster, fires in the forests and air charged with wood smoke had caused little apprehension. And as we're going to see, this was kind of the normal state of things. It was not necessarily something that caused a lot of apprehension because this was kind of the norm that, people would that there were many small fires throughout the woods, sometimes clearing fires, sometimes natural fires. They generally were easy to maintain. They didn't turn into or merge into a great conflagration. However, in this case, in the Miramichi fire, as the author goes on to say here, that with startling suddenness, the flames merged into a most impetuous hurricane that quickly did its terrible work.
That's in the Miramichi fire, or are we talking
That's
about?
the Miramichi fire. Yes, he's describing that. So he's obviously drawing the comparison between the situation and was suggesting, and the fact that when we made the reference to the purple mist, that would be consistent with an inversion layer, because if you have gas or pollutants, that would accumulate. And when you have a fog typically is caused by an inversion layer. So, but what would form a purple mist?
Some kind of refraction of the light, maybe?
Is it a fraction of the light, or is it chemical?
Yeah, it could be chemical too.
I would think it's probably chemical. We'll look into that.
Was the purple mist prior to the fire catching?
Yes.
Or was this okay?
Yes.
All right.
So, quick question: what about the Boston fire or the Great London fire? Do you think these may also be a part of this? Because those were also at the end of the year, right? One of them was in September and one was in November, I think.
I have not looked into those fires to the
Okay.
extent.
Well, when I was reading about the Chicago fire, I came across those as well because they were also gigantic, enormous, terribly destructive. Like, the London fire was in
Right.
1666 or something, and
I think that was the year.
and it burned a ton of the city in the same way. It was just completely out of control. They had to rebuild most of central London. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually have some papers and reports and stuff on the London fire that I haven't gotten into yet.
Okay. And there was one in Boston too in the 1800s that burned half the city down. So
Uh-huh.
anyway, back to Chicago.
Okay, so this is from the history of the Great Fire in Chicago, which appeared in the Great Fires in Chicago and the West, 1871. So this must have come out right away. To have been published in 1871. Anyway, so here's the quote right from the book, and notice in the title, "The Great Fires in Chicago and the West." Okay. Among the saddest events of history will rank the conflagration, which began in Chicago and raged with unchecked violence, consuming more than one half the city, destroying several hundred millions of property, occasioning large loss of life, and making homeless 100,000 people. That would be a calamity. Within one night, 100,000 people rendered homeless.
Yeah. Man.
Yeah. So then the renewal of the fire, or as it really was, an independent conflagration, began at 9 o'clock on Sunday night. So they've pinpointed the onset of that particular fire to within a matter of minutes. The whole portion of the south and north sides of the city were laid in ruins, and nothing resisted the appalling fury of the wasting element. Fireproofs were consumed as in a moment the flames lapped over whole blocks and across the river. When everything was licked up and devoured by the fire fiend, people were caught in their dwellings and burned, or were overtaken in the streets and destroyed, and only when the city was consumed in the track of the hurricane did the elemental war cease. For days the fire smoldered, and night after night the heavens glowed like the canopy of hell and threatened universal ruin. So, boy, that gets a little descriptive, doesn't it? So I am going to do a little share screen here. This was a illustration done to show what the Chicago fire looked like. And let me just do this.
Oh, man.
And you see the people gathered by the river here.
Yeah. And you got to love the guys trying to spray water. Like, it seems hopeless. They're still
trying
working
to
on
spray.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. So here are some of the more of the eyewitness accounts. These eyewitness accounts are pretty compelling. This is from the narrative of George M. Higginson. This was from the history of Chicago from the earliest period to the present time. So let's see here.
So what year was the Chicago fire?
1871. As I opened the front door, I saw the cinders falling like flakes of snow in a storm. As I looked to the south, the sky over the city was a bright red, glowing like a furnace, and studded with innumerable sparks, ignited cinders, and blazing embers shining like myriads of red stars. But I could see no flames nor even smoke. Indeed, the absence of smoke from any point of view I had of the fire was a notable characteristic which I attributed to the intensity of the heat. It seemed as if I were alone in the city, and that the last day had come, and the final conflagration of all things created was at hand. So that is very typical of these accounts, that people have this apocalyptic experience. They interpret it in terms of the end of the world type scenarios. Also from the same work, the history of Chicago continued, and this is from the account of Elias Colbert. Everyone has read, if he did not himself pass through the horrible experience, how, and this could be significant, how the very air itself seemed full of fire. how the flames seemed to take giant leaps of many hundreds of yards, breaking out in points far away from the scenes of general disaster, and how huge balloons of flame swept through the sky to descend and break like a burning water spout, licking up every vestige of human life and labor from open clearings to which many had fled as to a haven of safety. In the process, devastating flames were kindled afresh in hundreds of places so far removed from the previous locality of the fire that it seemed as if the havoc could only have been wrought by the torch of a destroying angel. And then we looked at...
Back to temperance.
Yes, then we look at this guy here. And here was Eon, the god of time and fiery destruction in the Mithraic tradition, wielding the torches of Ep079. Notice the flaming torches, the flame issuing from the lion's mouth, setting the altar here ablaze. Notice the wings. There's 4 wings, four serpents. And the lion's head, the flame coming forth from the mouth of the lion. Pretty wild stuff, I would say. Okay.
So yeah, the balloons of flame coming out of the sky is something we've heard from the other accounts as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's not. I don't think it's uncommon for fire to appear. Like if you've got a big fire somewhere, you can have it. You can have flames suddenly appear very far away from that, because bits of cinder will go way up in the air and then come down somewhere else and then start a new fire, and the next thing you know, you got another fire over there. But it's not. That's what they're saying is it was actually giant flames coming out of the sky and setting things alight, not a cinder landing in grass somewhere and setting that on fire.
Well, this is kind of what it seems.
Yeah.
If you've ever talked to many firemen?
No, have you?
Well, about the behavior of fire? Yeah, I have. In fact, I used to sell advertising for a magazine called Fire Chief. I used to go to these fire chief and fire conventions several times a year. They speak of fire as being alive.
Yeah.
They say it does. They'll go in to fight a fire, and they say it'll do remarkable, surprising things. It moves as if it's alive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way they treat it.
Well, I think that'll
Backdraft.
even come through in some of these eyewitness accounts, actually.
Think of it, Liam. An explosion.
That's right. Backdraft.
No, that was
Was that something else?
blown away or something.
Blown away. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah,
Okay.
I agree, Mike. I've heard that too.
And
And I've seen it do
Yes.
very strange things myself.
Yeah.
But I did think that, if going back to this inversion layer thing, you can imagine if you get a pipeline of convection that's punching through that inversion layer, getting into another low pressure zone, that it can be so conductive or moving so much material that you could have large masses of things that are burning actually flying up there, kind of like what a tornado would do. Pick something up, and then it's way up there and it's burning. And so what other people see is just like a giant fire coming out of the sky and just landing and just catching stuff. But it's actually materials that were picked up in that convection.
Well, you'll notice as we go through these eyewitness accounts, the frequent reference to a hurricane.
Yeah.
Even you will see there's references describing it as a tornado.
Yeah.
Of fire.
Yeah, we've seen that too with with controlled fires we build out here.
You'll see this like tornado. It's it's not a tornado, but it's like
It's sort of like a dust. That's what I say, like a dust devil.
And
scale.
it'll move out of the fire, but it's like fire.
Yeah,
And
carrying
just-
flames with it,
just
but
starts
leaves
going off away from the main, fire. It
It can
it's
be
crazy.
quite terrifying. Yeah.
I bet it can.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is from the account of Richard Riley, who was a railroad contractor. Mr. Riley believed that the region was doomed and hastened home to prepare for the rescue of his own family and effects. After accomplishing what he could in the way of precaution, he went to the northeast corner of Taylor and Canal Streets, where there were piles of lumber about 25 feet high. Climbing upon one of these, Mr. Riley watched the progress of the flames. It was then about 30 or 35 minutes past 9 o'clock. A fierce, seesawing hurricane set in. The fire appeared to tear up and instantly consume the firmer structures, while light and loose articles were hurled into the air like blazing torches. A large mass of fire, seemingly 2 feet in length and 1 foot in thickness, arose from a spot just north of Taylor Street and went whirling through the air for more than 3 blocks, alighting on the cupola of the German Catholic Church on the northeast corner of Mather and Clinton Streets. The entire building was almost instantaneously enveloped in flames.
And this guy watched this from a 25-foot high pile of fuel.
Of long, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Jeez.
So maybe after that, he common sense got the better of him. But I'm thinking now of this verse from Acts 2nd chapter, verse 3 in the Bible. And there appeared unto them cloven tongues like as of fire, and it sat upon each of them. For some reason, I just thought of that verse when I read that account. So, from the various recitals of individuals presented, a general idea of the terrors excited by this event may be gained. Also, a conception of the progress and magnitude of the conflagration. No pen can do adequate justice to the subject. No limner could depict the scene. There is nothing wherewith the fire can be compared. It stands alone, a monument in the annals of pyrology. But when the reader looks intelligently at the enormous surface burned over, remembers the very brief time occupied in the destruction, and then reads the particular narrative or recital, he may arrive at some little comprehension of the catastrophe. The incredible rapidity of the flames was noticeable here as upon the south side. In fact, the mind is scarcely able to comprehend what is implied by this term, and none, save those who beheld the scenes of agony, can realize what is meant. Also, just a selection of quotes that from various eyewitnesses. First quote, "During all this time, the fire was falling in torrents. There was literally a rain of fire." End of quote. Second quote, "There was a sea of fire to the south and southwest. The wind blew a perfect gale." Third quote, "I saw the sky, as it were, in flames over my head, and the streets lighted as if by lurid sunlight. What a scene! A sea of fire." Final quote, "Here indeed commenced the total extermination of all that was combustible. Buildings of every description were swept away, leaving the ground upon which they had stood a field of absolute waste." Some few incidents are inserted here to show how terrible was the fire. When it had reached the business center of the city, it ceased to be governed by any of the ordinary rules that are commonly attendant upon even great fires, as the terms are usually understood. In places, the heat could only be compared to that from the combustion of oxygen and hydrogen by means of a blowpipe. In places, it would strike great iron columns nearly 2 feet in width, nearly 2 feet square, and for 4 or 5 feet, perhaps more, the iron would all be burned up and no residuum would be left.
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
Posted on the 17th of October from an anonymous writer. From the roof of a tall stable and warehouse to which the writer clambered, the sight was one of unparalleled sublimity and terror. He could feel the heat and smoke and hear the maddened babble of sounds, and it required but little imagination to believe oneself looking over the adamantine bulwarks of hell into the bottomless pit. And adamantine is defined as impenetrable, like a diamond. In olden times, some impenetrably hard substance. And then, from the statement of ex-Lieutenant Governor Brose, quote, "At this time the fire was the most grandly magnificent scene that one can conceive. The courthouse, post office, Farwell Hall, Tremont House, Sherman House, and all the splendid buildings on LaSalle and Wells Street were burning with a sublimity of effect which awed me. All the adjectives in the language would fail to convey the intensity of its wonders." He goes on to say that safes, iron safes, if exposed to these jets of heat, were of no account whatsoever. George Smith, banker, told me that they had standing in a back office a large safe full of ledgers and other books. That safe and its contents were all burned. Not a vestige of it remained to mark where it stood. Some of the freaks of the fire are scarcely credible. Very reliable gentlemen reported that they saw jets of flame dart across an entire block and in an instant envelop the building it struck in a winding sheet of lurid flame. The heat of the burning city was felt far away on the lake. So hot was the wind over at Holland, Michigan, 100 miles or more to the northeast of Chicago, that some parties there on the afternoon of Monday were obliged to get down behind a hedge and let the scorching blasts pass over them. They were unable then to account for the heat and greatly feared that the time had come when the earth and all things living would be burned up. So let's do a couple more.
I looked this up because you're saying that they had these iron safes and there was nothing left, which implies that it didn't just melt, but it evaporated it, like burned it away. So apparently iron turns into a gas at 2,862 degrees Celsius.
How much?
2,862 degrees Celsius.
2,862 Celsius.
That's right. It melts at 1538, turns into a gas at 2862.
So let's see. I'm going to try something here.
I mean, how else would you completely make the safe completely disappear? Like if they didn't even find a puddle of slag, it's just gone.
A conspiracy, that's how.
That's right. It sounds
like, let's see. I own a bank. There's a big fire.
Let's get rid of those ledgers.
Let's just, yeah. We'll just tell them the whole safe just vanished.
Are we talking like 5,000 degrees?
We'll tell you in a second.
More than that.
It wasn't just the safe. They were saying this was happening to iron pillars and
columns.
stuff as well. Columns. So that's wild.
2,800 times 1.
Yeah, that would be 5,000 over almost 5,200 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
Oof.
Damn.
So that's a bit warm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a bit warm. 5,200 degrees Fahrenheit. Interesting detail. So
it's wild to imagine the people in that town 100 miles away or whatever just getting the wind starts blowing. It's so hot they have to go hide behind something. It's crazy.
it is crazy.
That would be terrifying. There's obviously no explanation for them at the time.
Right.
Man.
So we'll look at some artwork here.
I mean, a modern oxyacetylene cutting torch doesn't get that hot. It will melt iron, but it won't. I don't think it will evaporate it.
Vaporize it? No.
Right.
Wow.
And that's hotter than a blast furnace. And to make it vaporize.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
So this is mass terror in Chicago. View northeast across the Randolph Street Bridge. So this was a bizarre happening here because people from one side were fleeing to the other side while the people on the other side were fleeing to the other side, and they just ran into a big squash in the middle of the bridge.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, and there is this interesting sense of like what you were pointing out earlier in some of the quotes, that people who are familiar with forest fires, and familiar with even building fires and large city fires, these events overtake that sensation and make them think like this is the end of the world. It's not,
Yes.
this isn't a big forest fire. This is not a big city fire. The stuff that's happening makes me feel like the whole planet is on fire. Like this is so enormous that it completely overwhelms their sense of scale.
And here we go. Next quote. There it is. Look at it. The whole earth, or all we saw of it, was a lurid yellowish red, wrote one survivor. Everywhere, dust, smoke, flames, heat, thunder of falling walls, crackle of fire, hissing of water, panting of engines, shouts, braying of trumpets, roar of wind, confusion, and uproar.
By the way, magnesium burns at 2,200 Celsius or 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's pretty close.
Yeah, I think that's around the same temperature as an oxyacetylene torch, around 2,200. Not quite hot enough to vaporize iron.
So let's go on. This again is Chicago and the Great Conflagration, Elias Colbert and Everett Chamberlain, published shortly after the fire. So the recollections were very fresh on people's minds. So the fact that building stone was everywhere, baked and blistered into mere chips, even where it was used only for sidewalk or foundations, attests to the fearful heat which prevailed everywhere. But in the interior of buildings, the fervor was unprecedented, as witnessed the melting of the great courthouse bell, the burning up of many safes so that they could be punctured with a single touch of the crowbar, and the fusion of metals generally. In the stores of Messrs. Heath and Milligan, the temperature was above 3,000 degrees, as shown by the melting of white lead and other stores requiring that degree of heat to fuse them. How much hotter it became, there is no index to determine. But this is known, that large masses of iron, such as iron columns in the framework of a large elevator, were literally burned up so that no trace of them could be found. So, from a letter by the Honorable William B. Ogden, who was one of the rich entrepreneurs that helped build the city of Chicago, here's a letter from him to a member of his family. Quote, "The reason that buildings, men, or anything did not withstand the torrents of fire without utter destruction is explained by the fact that the fire was accompanied by the fiercest tornado of wind ever known to blow here, and it acted like a perfect blowpipe, driving the brilliant blaze hundreds of feet with so perfect a combustion that it consumed the smoke, and its heat was so great that fireproof buildings sunk before it as readily as wood. Like the advance of a great army, the fires moved forward in several columns, and like a well-whipped but unconquered foe, the fire department slowly retreated. But they stubbornly contested every foot of ground, however, and would not surrender, although often almost entirely surrounded by the dread enemy. But no power on earth could stem the torrent. Never did firemen fight more fiercely to conquer, and never before did their heroic efforts seem so utterly in vain. The huge stone and brick structures melted before the fierceness of the flames like a snowflake melts and disappears in water, and almost as quickly. 6-story buildings would take fire and disappear forever from sight in 5 minutes by the watch. The fire also doubled on its track at the Great Union Depot and burned a half-mile southward in the very teeth of the gale, a gale which blew a perfect tornado. Strange, fantastic fires of blue, red, and green played along the cornices of the buildings. How was it that, while even 100 buildings might be blazing, others, far in advance of the track of the storm, could not be protected? Has not been understood by those who were not despairingly following the course of destruction. It was partly on account of the artificial currents already mentioned, and because huge tongues of flame actually stretched themselves out on the pinions of the wind for acres. Sheets of fire would reach over entire blocks, wrapping in every building enclosed by the 4 streets bounding them, and scarcely allowing the dwellers in the houses time to dash away unscorched. The sensations conveyed to the spectator of this unparalleled event, either through the eye, the ear, or other senses or sympathies, cannot be adequately described. And any attempt to do it but shows the poverty of language. As a spectacle, it was beyond doubt the grandest as well as the most appalling ever offered to mortal eyes. From any elevated standpoint, the appearance was that of a vast ocean of flame, sweeping in mile-long billows and breakers over the doomed city. A square of substantial buildings would be submerged by it like a child's tiny heap of sand on the beach of a lake. And when the flood receded, there was no more left of the stately block than of the tiny sand heap. So
did part of that say that at one point the fire seemed to go against the wind?
Yes. Okay, so...
And during that, they saw strange colors in the flames? That's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let me...
Getting close to good break time, too.
Okay, well, we'll look at some pictures of the destruction here. So this is like the day after. So one day you've got a whole city here, and then this is the next day. This is a few days later. And look, you can already see the streetcars starting to come back within this devastation of the city. Okay, so yeah. Tuesday morning, awe-stricken citizens explored the ruins of the heart of the city. The burned-over area was roughly 1 mile across and 4 miles in length. Many buildings had vanished so completely there was no evidence that they had ever existed. For mile after mile, no sign of the city remained but the built-up roadways which resembled lonely high roads designed solely to permit passage through some otherwise impassable desert.
I mean, they keep saying that there's no evidence of, no evidence that a safe was there or no evidence. I wonder if that's like a phrase. Is that a colloquialism at the time? Because, I mean, you've got a pile of bricks and ashes and all that. That's the evidence that there was a building.
I think the no evidence would be the wooden houses. There would just be.
Yeah, you can't see a house, but
yeah.
Okay. That's what I'm thinking. It's not like we were talking about vaporized steel, but it
well,
seems
in some
like
cases, I mean, when you had steel I-beams that there was no trace of left. And of course, the effects of the fire are not going to be uniformly, manifest throughout the entire. Some areas are probably going to be undoubtedly subject to more intense pockets of heat, and others, I don't think you're going to be looking at a entirely uniform effect with something like this.
Yeah, and there was one quote he read where they made a distinction between safes that were just so destroyed by the fire that they could go through it with a crowbar very easily versus the iron columns in the elevator shaft that just vanished completely, not even puddles.
Well, there was the one account where the safe had completely disappeared.
Yeah, right.
So apparently many safes were destroyed, but
viewing those photos, it strikes me that your phrase cultural amnesia, or is that yours or Graham's?
Graham, I guess.
But if it had not been for photographs and for written records of the time, this is one of those things that would have been passed into memory and become legend.
Yeah,
and people would say 100 years from now or 500 would say it was this legend about a great cataclysm, a great fire that destroyed a major city, but we have there's no evidence. And frankly, the way Chicago's been built over, you could probably not see any evidence of it. But it goes to what you've talked about in the past about our ability to forget these things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, the memory is there in the legend, but future people decide that the legend is just a story.
Right.
Yeah. Well, should we take a break?
Let's take a little break.
All right.
And then we'll come back, look a little more, and then we'll get started taking a look at the Peshtigo fire.
Okay. Be right back.
All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Cosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast. And we want to mention CBDfromthegods.com, and they are sending a special care package, right? Because you're making a trip.
Yeah, day after tomorrow, which will probably have already passed by the time people are watching this. But we will be departing from Georgia, coming out your way to Texas, to Austin. We're going to drop in and pay a visit to Joe Rogan, and I'm sure that by the time people are listening to this, that will have already happened. But we're getting a care package. It's going to be sent to Russ, and it will be oil, salve, and gummies. So gummies for you, Brad. Oil for me. I don't know what's in there for you. I guess oil for you.
Yep,
Russ?
I'm getting a new shipment of oil, and I think the salve is for Joe.
For Joe.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, good.
Okay. All right.
Yep, I made specific gummy request.
All right.
Mm-hmm. So we're looking forward to that, getting that, because I've been doing it regularly, religiously, and fully intend to keep right on doing it.
Yep, timing is good too because I just ran out, so looking forward to getting a new.
Have you been out?
Oh,
I
perfect.
just ran out of the
Oh,
CBD
okay.
oil, and I use it every night to go to sleep. So yeah,
Still helping you sleep?
yes,
Wow.
I can tell when I don't have
That's
it.
pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
CBD from
I
the
can tell when I
gods.
don't have it too. Although there'll be that rare night, where I still will get insomnia.
Yeah, of course.
'Cause I'm prone. I've been prone to that since I was as long as I can remember. So not surprising to me that it would nip it 100% in the bud, but definitely it's a big improvement.
Yep,
Big improvement. So
it
I'm gonna
makes the
stay with
sleep
it.
that I do get much better. That's how I
Yeah,
look at it.
that's right.
Yeah,
Well, and of course, I think for me, insomnia oftentimes is associated with just things that we got to do, and I'm thinking about stuff, and I can't turn it off. I'm just thinking about the stuff I got to do the next day or the day after that, or that kind of thing. And usually when I get that, I'm stay awake half the night thinking about what's going to go on the next day or what do I got to do, and then the next day comes, and all I want to do is go to sleep. So
right.
this is a
vicious cycle.
conundrum that must be resolved. Anyhow,
Well-
compared to what these people were going through,
Yeah.
I've got nothing to complain about.
Real quick, visit cbdfromthegods.com, and is promo code still the same? RC ships
I
free.
think so.
You get free shipping. And thanks to
Yeah.
everybody who does that, as well as donating to the shows, Patreon, and whatnot. It all helps.
Absolutely. All right, so let's continue on with a few more eyewitness accounts. We just left off that with a quote saying that describing how block after block would reveal no evidence. Let's see. Yeah. I think, did we do this one? In some areas, no, we didn't. So Tuesday morning, awe-stricken citizens explored the ruins of the heart of the city, the burned-over area, roughly a mile across, 4 miles in length. And so many buildings, not all buildings, but many buildings had vanished so completely there was no evidence they had ever existed. In some areas, there was not a sound to break the solitude, not a building to change the blackened landscape. Where wooden buildings had stood, the work of destruction was as complete as if the whole had been caught up and borne away. Block after block would reveal no evidence of there having existed civilization. Now, I find that to be a very interesting idea, because if you have that degree of destruction, how long are you going to have any trace at all to document in the aftermath? How long would that, 10 years later, 20 years, a century later, would a passerby ever have known that a great city had stood there? There would probably still be some remnants,
If
but
not for the roads, like they said, the roads seem to rise up out of the destruction.
yeah.
So maybe you would recognize a grid of roads in a strange way in this empty field, with grass.
But what would you recognize after 1,000 years?
Oh yeah,
Or 10,000 years?
no, you wouldn't see it. Yeah,
No. So block after block would reveal no evidence of there having existed civilization, save the excavation of the cellars and a thin layer of ash. Wood was reduced to an impalpable dust, and all metals shrank away in liquid rivulets and disappeared. Besides the extent of the ruins, what is most remarkable is the completeness with which the fire did its work, as shown by the prostration of the ruins and the extraordinary absence of smoke stains, brands, and all debris except stone, brick, and iron, bleached to an ashy pallor. It is the exception to find even a single corner or chimney holding together to a height of more than 20 feet. It has been possible from the top of an omnibus to see men standing on the ground 3 miles away across what was the densest, loftiest, and most substantial part of the city. Let's look at some more.
I wonder what kind of stone they're talking about, the brick, but we've brought this up before. We've had big fires out here in the stone, the limestone, which is usually yellowish in color, but it can be darkened by climate and exposure. But after these huge fires, they're often, they're bright white, or sometimes they'll turn red and they just turn into brittle fragments. But yeah, it can, and you would think that it would be blackened by the fire, but no, they end up bright white, bleached, like they're describing in that account.
For comparison, Hiroshima, 1941. And I always find these pictures interesting. Okay, if you look at this complete devastation, but you've still got some buildings standing here that survived. Then I become curious about what specifically is it in the structure or design of these buildings, or is it something in the anomaly of the firestorm, or some combination of two? Why did they survive? And then Chicago, the beginning of the first effort of reconstruction. See the tents that they've set up out here? And so now...
Yeah, so if those squares out there where the tents are used to be full of buildings and houses, that's crazy.
Right, yeah. So there were areas where there was basically nothing.
Yeah.
Which brings us to Peshtigo. Let's see here. So we visited here the October 1871, America's most disastrous forest fire. In December of 1996, during filming of Fire from the Sky for TBS Network. Peshtigo, the city reborn from the ashes of America's most disastrous forest fire. Okay, this is from Stuart Holbrook, 1956, American Heritage, Volume 7, Number 5. One of America's great disasters might just as well have happened in a void, so far as public knowledge of it is concerned. This was the tragedy of the Peshtigo forest fire in Wisconsin, during which some 1,200 people lost their lives on the evening of October 8, 1871. By an incomparable irony of fate, this happened also to be the night when, in the barn of Mrs. O'Leary, a cow supposedly kicked over a lantern that set Chicago on fire and burned it down to the edge of the lake. And so this is, as we'll go through here, we'll see that most of the eyewitness accounts place the breakout of the firestorm right at 9 o'clock that evening. So not only on the same day, but the same hour. And what's interesting here is that, as it says here, this was the most devastating forest fire in America's history. And it basically happened concurrently with the most devastating urban fire in American history, which is the Chicago fire. So these two fires ignited essentially simultaneously. And then here's a little poem that somebody wrote. It seems to be, this is published in the Marinette Eagle on October 4th, 1895, by a survivor of the Peshtigo fire. On swept the tornado with maddening rush, uprooting the trees over the plain through the brush, and the sky-leaping flames with hot, scorching breath gathered parents and children to the harvest of death. As years roll along and the ages have sped over the charred, blackened bones of the Peshtigo dead, and the story is told by the pen of the sage, in letters immortal on history's page. No fancy can compass the horror and fright, the anguish and woe of that terrible night. So from the Great Peshtigo Fire, which appeared as was a article in the Wisconsin History magazine in 1971. An interesting point is made here. On October 8th, 1971, marks the centennial of the two greatest natural catastrophes in the history of the Middle West. Ironically, both happened not only on the same day, but almost at the same hour. Both had been preceded by ample but disregarded omens. And when you study into the history of the great disasters, you'll find over and over and over again that there were omens signaling something was about to happen unprecedented. And some people were aware of those omens and others were oblivious to them. So this is from a description that was printed in the Peshtigo Times, September 1990. Fiery hell descended on Peshtigo the night of October 8, 1871, mutilating northern Wisconsin with a livid scar of death and destruction still unequaled in the tragic annals of the world's great fires. Within a few short hours, the lives of 800 persons, now that's the population of Peshtigo, not the total fatalities. Within a few short hours, the lives of 800 persons were snuffed out in an inferno of flame and terror. A flourishing sawmill town was leveled to a desert of smoking ashes, its streets strewn with the blackened bodies of men, women, and children. Miles of rich farm and woodlands were scorched into desolation and littered with the seared corpses of burned victims. And yet, for decades, the horrors of the Peshtigo fire remained forgotten in history, obscured by the more widely known Holocaust that devoured a part of Chicago that very same night in one of fate's grim coincidences. So we'll do another screen share here, and we will look at a map so we can see where we are looking at. There's our map of Wisconsin. Okay, so let's look over here. This is Lake Michigan. This is the Door Peninsula, the mainland here. In between is Green Bay. All right. The star marks the position of Peshtigo. So I think I have another graphic here to show the area. Here's the Door Peninsula. And the fires started down here at the south end of the firestorm, ignited apparently at the south end of Green Bay, and then swept north up both sides of Green Bay. Up one flame spread north up Door Peninsula. Interestingly, at the same time, and this is also something that is completely forgotten. Well, here's Chicago down here, but the Manistee fire, which was even burned up more area than the Peshtigo fire, also ignited that same evening around 9 o'clock. And then there was another fire over here on the shores of Lake Huron that also ignited at that same night around 9 o'clock. I've not been able to find much on this fire yet. I'm still trying to get some sources on it. But this was, as it says here, locations of some of the great firestorms of October 8th through the 9th, 1871. So we have this phenomena here of these great firestorms the author of the quote that I just read was talking about the simultaneous ignition of the Peshtigo fire and the Chicago fire as being a grim coincidence. But what happens, what does it mean when you have two other similar sized firestorms igniting at the same time?
What were the names of the other two again?
This, I don't know the name of this one. This was the Manistee fire here. And then here's a closer up map. We can see Peshtigo here, right along the Peshtigo River. And this is Marinette, Wisconsin, right here, the town of Marinette, which is an interesting name, as you'll see here later on as we get into it. And here is your bird's eye view of Peshtigo on the eve of the Great Fire, looking east. Peshtigo River coming through here. So just to help people get a picture of that. So let's dive into some of these unpublished manuscripts and letters. So this is from an unpublished letter by Mrs. W.A. Ellis to Miss Jackson, dated November 12th, 1871, from Peshtigo Harbor. Quote, "What an experience we have all passed through. Sad to all, heartrending to many. We cannot realize that every home in Peshtigo is in ashes, that we were witnesses to that dreadful night. How many precious souls were wafted to heaven as on the wings of fire, our Father only knows. Men, women, and children who but a half hour before were in all their loveliness were trying to escape through fire only to be driven back and burned in the streets." So, from the Oconto County, Wisconsin a history project, this was also a report that was in one of the older newspapers that came out sometime after, historically recognizing the fire, probably like 60 years later, I think it was. So for more than 60 years after the fire, most survivors bore the massive disfiguring scars that were so prominent on their heads, arms, legs, faces, hands, and feet. They lived among the general population, some trying to hide their inner and outer scars, and others wearing them openly. The great loss that they represented has traveled down the generations of many families who feel the deep sadness, even though the reason for it is no longer remembered. So then, this is from the history of the Peshtigo fire, October 8th, 1871. This appeared in the Peshtigo Times on October 6th, 1921. So the wind had been very light through the afternoon, but breezed up into quite a stiff gale, blowing for a short time and then dying down to a perfect calm. This calm is spoken of as being something almost unnatural. It was like the silence of the grave. About 9 o'clock Sunday night, a terrible tornado swept down from the southwest through the western side of the county, carrying death and destruction in its awful career. The fire did not come upon the people gradually from burning trees or other objects to the windward, but the first notice that they had of it was a whirlwind of flames in great clouds from above the tops of the trees, which fell upon and enveloped everything. The atmosphere itself seemed to be on fire. The poor people inhaled it or the intensely hot air and fell down dead. And this next account is from the Reverend Pernon. He was a Catholic priest at the town. This was originally published back in 1874, reprinted by the State Historical Society of Wisconsin, 1971. And there's a number of interesting themes and important points that kind of emerge from this particular story. So we'll dive right into it. And this is just quote. I'm not going to do the whole thing. I'm just selecting quotes through it. So here we begin. What did these repeated alarms filling the minds of the people with anxiety during the 3 or 4 weeks preceding the great calamity seem to indicate? Now, this is what I had referred to earlier, this idea that you had some of the people who seemed to have a premonition of something impending that caused them to feel ill at ease. We all know the reports of animals reacting like even hours before an earthquake, as if they know they're sensing it on some level. And I think that humans have the ability to sense these things, but a lot of that kind of subtle sense that our ancestors may have had has been lost over the generations. But let's go on with what the Reverend Peter Pernon has to say. That there were alarms filling the minds of the people with anxiety. Doubtless, they might have been looked on as the natural result of the great dryness. The number of fires lighted throughout the forests by hunters or others, as well as the wind that fanned from time to time these fires. But who will dare to say that they were not specially ordained by Him who is the master of causes as well as their effects? Does He not, in most cases, avail Himself of natural causes to execute His will and bring the most wonderful results? Which is a perspective that we could be entirely expect from a Catholic priest, right? I cannot say whether they were looked on by many in this light or not, but certainly some were greatly alarmed and prepared as far as lay in their power for a general conflagration, burying in the earth those objects which they specially wished to save. The company, which was the lumber company that around which this community had grown up, the company caused all combustible materials on which a fire could possibly feed to be taken away, and augmented the number of water hogsheads girdling the town. Wise precautions, certainly, which would have been of great service in any ordinary case of fire, but which were utterly unavailing in the awful conflagration that burst upon us. They served, nevertheless, to demonstrate more clearly the finger of God in the events which succeeded. It would indeed be difficult for anyone who had assisted, as I had done, at the terrible events following so closely on the above-mentioned indications, not to see in them the hand of God, and infer in consequences that these various signs were but forerunners of the great tragedy for which He wished us to be in some degree prepared. Again, this reference to the idea that there's a foretending, signs and omens that some people were privy to or aware of, while others were not. Peshtigo is situated on a river of that name, about 6 miles from Green Bay, with which it communicates by means of a small railroad. The company established at Peshtigo is a source of prosperity to the whole country, not only from its spirit of enterprise and large pecuniary resources, but also from its numerous establishments, the most important of which, a factory of tubs and buckets, affords alone steady employment to more than 300 workmen. The population of Peshtigo, including the farmers settled in the neighborhood, numbered then about 2,000 souls. We were just finishing the construction of a church, looked on as a great embellishment to the parish. My abode was near the church, to the west of the river, and about a 5 or 6 minute walk from the latter. I mention this so as to render the circumstances of my escape through the midst of the flames more intelligible. In the afternoon, when about leaving for Marinette, where I was accustomed to chant vespers and preach when High Mass was said at Peshtigo, which was every fortnight, my departure was strongly opposed by several of my parishioners. There seemed to be a vague fear of some impending, though unknown evil haunting the minds of many, nor was I myself entirely free from this unusual feeling. It was rather an impression than a conviction, for on reflecting I saw that things looked much as usual, and arrived at the conclusion that our fears were groundless, without, however, feeling much reassured thereby. The afternoon passed in complete inactivity. I remained still a prey to the indefinable apprehensions of impending calamity already alluded to, apprehensions contradicted by reason which assured me there was no more cause for present fear than there had been 8 or 15 days before. Indeed, less, on account of the precautions taken and the numerous sentinels watching over the public safety. These two opposite sentiments, one of which persistently asserted itself despite every effort to shake it off, whilst the other, inspired by reason, was powerless to reassure me, plunged my faculties into a species of mental torpor. In the outer world, everything contributed to keep alive these two different impressions. On one side, the thick smoke darkening the sky, the heavy, suffocating atmosphere, the mysterious silence filling the air. So often a presage of storm seemed to afford grounds for fear in case of a sudden gale. On the other hand, the passing and repassing in the street of countless young people bent only on amusement, laughing, singing, and perfectly indifferent to the menacing aspect of nature was sufficient to make me think that I alone was a prey to anxiety and to render me ashamed of manifesting the feeling. Towards 7 in the evening, always haunted by the same misgivings, I left home to see how it went with my neighbors. I stepped over to the first house of an elderly, kind-hearted widow, and we walked out together on her land. The wind was beginning to rise, blowing in short, fitful gusts, as if to try its strength, and then, as quickly, subsiding. My companion was as troubled as myself, and kept pressing her children to take some precautionary measures, but they refused, laughing lightly at her fears. At one time, whilst we were still in the fields, the wind rose suddenly with more strength than it had yet displayed, and I perceived some old trunks of trees blaze out, though without seeing about them any tokens of cinder or spark, just as if the wind had been a breath of fire, capable of kindling them into a flame by its mere contact. We extinguished these, the wind fell again, and nature resumed her moody and mysterious silence. I re-entered the house, but only to leave it feeling restless, though at the same time devoid of anything like energy, and retraced my steps to my own abode to conceal within it as best I could my vague but continually deepening anxieties. On looking towards the west, whence the wind had persistently blown for hours past, I perceived above the dense cloud of smoke overhanging the earth a vivid red reflection of immense extent, and then suddenly struck on my ear, strangely audible in the preternatural silence reigning around, a distant roaring, yet muffled sound, announcing that the elements were in commotion somewhere. I rapidly resolved to return home and prepare, without further hesitation, for whatever events were impending. From listless and undecided as I had previously been, I suddenly became active and determined. It was now about 8:30 in the evening. I first thought of my horse, and turned him free into the street, deeming that, in any case, he would have more chance of escape thus than tied up in the stable. I then set about digging a trench 6 feet wide and 6 or 7 feet deep, in the sandy soil of the garden, and though the earth was easy enough to work, my task proved a tedious one. The atmosphere was heavy and oppressive, strangely affecting the strength and rendering respiration painful and laborious. The only conclusion that could have induced me to keep on working when I found it almost impossible to move my limbs was the fear, growing more strongly each moment to a certainty that some great catastrophe was approaching. The crimson reflection in the western portion of the sky was rapidly increasing in size and in intensity. Then, between each stroke of my pickaxe, I heard plainly, in the midst of the unnatural calm and silence reigning around, the strange and terrible noise already described, the muttered thunder of which became more distinct as it drew each moment nearer. The sound resembled the confused noise of a number of cars and locomotives approaching a railroad station, or the rumbling of thunder, with the difference that it never ceased, but deepened in intensity each moment, more and more. The spectacle of this menacing crimson in the sky, the sound of this strange and unknown voice of nature constantly augmenting in terrible majesty, seemed to endow me with supernatural strength. The wind, forerunner of the tempest, was increasing in violence. The redness of the sky was deepening, and the roaring sound like thunder seemed almost upon us. It was now time to think of the Blessed Sacrament, object of all objects, precious, priceless, especially in the eyes of a priest. Of course, I had intended from the first to bring it with me. Hastening then to the chamber containing the tabernacle, I proceeded to open the ladder. There was no time to delay, so I caught up the tabernacle with its contents and carried it out. I re-entered to seek the chalice, which had not been placed in the tabernacle, when a strange and startling phenomena met my view. It was that of a cloud of sparks that blazed up here and there with a sharp detonating sound like that of powder exploding, and flew from room to room. I understood then that the air was saturated with some special gas. And I could not help thinking, if this gas lighted up from mere contact with a breath of hot wind, what would it be when fire would come in actual contact with it? I vainly called my dog, who, disobeying the summons, concealed himself under my bed, only to meet death there later. Then I hastened out to open the gate so as to bring forth my wagon. Barely had I laid a hand on it, when the wind, heretofore violently, rose suddenly to a hurricane, and quick as lightning opened the way for my egress from the yard by sweeping planks, gate, and fencing away into space. The road is open, I thought. We have only to start. The air was no longer fit to breathe, full as it was of sand, dust, ashes, cinders, sparks, smoke, and fire. It was almost impossible to keep one's eyes unclosed, to distinguish the road, or to recognize people. Some were hastening toward the river, others from it, whilst all were struggling alike in the grasp of the hurricane. 1,000 discordant noises rose on the air together. The neighing of horses, falling of chimneys, crashing of uprooted trees, roaring and whistling of the wind, crackling of fire as it ran with lightning-like rapidity from house to house. All sounds were there, save that of the human voice. People seemed stricken dumb by terror. The silence of the tomb reigned among the living. Nature alone lifted up its voice and spoke. The whirlwind into its continual accession had, so to speak, worked up the smoke, dust, and cinders, so that at least we could see clear before us the banks of the river as far as the eye could reach, were covered with people, standing there, motionless as statues, some with eyes staring upturned towards the heaven, and tongues protruded. The greater number seemed to have no idea of taking any steps to procure their safety, imagining, as many afterwards acknowledged to me, that the end of the world had arrived, and there was nothing for them but silent submission to their fate. It was about 10 o'clock when we entered into the river. When doing so, I neither knew the length of time we would be obliged to remain there, nor what would ultimately happen to us. Once in the water up to our necks, I thought we would at least be safe from fire. But it was not so. The flames darted over the river as they did over the land. The air was full of them, or rather, the air itself was on fire. The terrible whirlwind that had burst over us at the moment I was leaving home had, with its continually revolving circle of opposing winds, cleared the atmosphere. The river was as bright, brighter than by day. When turning my gaze from the river, I chanced to look either to the right or left, before me or upwards. I saw nothing but flames. Houses, trees, and the air itself were on fire. Above my head, as far as the eye could reach into space, alas, too brilliantly lighted, I saw nothing but immense volumes of flames covering the firmament, rolling one over the other with stormy violence. The hour of deliverance from this prison of fire and water had not yet arrived. The struggle was not yet over. A lady who had remained beside me since we had first taken to the river, and who, like all others, had remained silent till then, now asked me, "Father, do you not think this is the end of the world?" "I do not think so," was my reply. "But if other countries are burned as ours seems to have been, the end of the world, at least for us, must be at hand." After this, we both lapsed into silence. It is a painful thing to have to speak of scenes which we feel convinced no pen could fully describe, nor words do justice to. It was the 11th of October, Wednesday afternoon, that I revisited for the first time the site of what had once been the town of Peshtigo. Of the houses, trees, fences that I had looked on 3 days ago, nothing whatever remained, save a few blackened posts still standing, as if to attest the impetuous fury of the fiery element that had destroyed all before it. Wherever the foot chanced to fall, it rested on ashes. The iron tracks of the railroad had been twisted and curved into all sorts of shapes, whilst the wood which had supported them no longer existed. The trunks of mighty trees had been reduced to mere cinders, the blackened hearts alone remaining. All around these trunks I perceived a number of holes running downwards deep into the earth. They were the sockets where the roots had lately been. I plunged my cane into one of them, thinking, what must the violence of that fire have been, which ravaged not only the surface of the earth, but penetrated so deeply into its bosom? And then that reminds me of a verse from the 4th chapter of Malachi. "For behold, a day cometh that shall burn as an oven, and all the proud, yea, and all that do wickedly, shall be stubble. And the day that cometh shall burn them up, saith the Lord of the host, that it shall leave them neither root nor branch." Whole forests of huge maples, deeply and strongly rooted in the soil, were torn up, twisted, and broken as if they had been willow wands. A tree standing upright here or there was an exception to an almost general rule. There lay those children of the forest, heaped up one over the other in all imaginable positions, their branches reduced to cinders, and their trunks calcined and blackened. Many asseverated that they had seen large wooden houses torn from their foundations and caught up like straws by two opposing currents of air, which raised them till they came in contact with the stream of fire. They then burst into flames and exposed thus to the fury of the two fierce elements, wind and fire, were torn to pieces and reduced to ashes almost simultaneously. We're almost done. Many circumstances tended to prove that the intensity of the heat produced by the fire was in some places extreme, nay, unheard of. I have already mentioned that the flames pursued the roots of the trees into the very depths of the earth, consuming them to the last inch. I plunged my cane down into these cavities and convinced myself that nothing had stayed the course of combustion save the utter want of anything to feed upon. It is more than probable that for a moment the air was impregnated with an inflammable gas, most destructive to human life. I've already mentioned the tiny globules of fire flying about my house at the moment I quitted it. Whilst on my way to the river, I met now and then gusts of an air utterly unfit for respiration, and was obliged on these occasions to throw myself on the ground to regain my breath, unless already prostrated involuntarily by the wind. While standing in the river, I had noticed, as I have already related, on casting my eye upwards, a sea of flame, as it were, the immense waves of which were in a state of violent commotion, rolling tumultuously one over the other, and all at a prodigious height in the sky, and consequently far from any combustible material. How can this phenomena be explained without admitting the supposition that immense quantities of gas were accumulated in the air? And there we will leave it for this episode.
Wow. That is a fantastic account.
Isn't it though?
Yes.
Yeah.
The little, sparks of flame moving through his house was just that is, nothing's burning as far as he knows, and yet he's walking through his house like he's got these bad feelings and he can't get his dog out, and then he sees little fireflies of flame moving around.
Well, I keep, getting the image of him getting out to his fence, going to open the gate, and as he's reaching out his hand, the gate, the fence, and everything is swept away into space.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, in our next episode, we will resume our study of these incredible fires. And then we'll look at them and some of the eyewitness accounts, and we'll try to see if we can't see some themes emerging that we can kind of weave together into some kind of a meaningful interpretation of what happened.
All right.
Okay. Excellent show. Thank you.
And also, well, speaking of sign up, I'll just mention sign up for the newsletter if you haven't already.
Yep.
We try to put some good stuff in there every month coming out. I like to look through I'm constantly perusing the scientific literature and paying attention to what's going on and on the various fronts that would be of interest to cosmographians. So I always report on some of the cool new stuff and give the references. And then sometimes that material will make it into the upcoming Randall report. Randall and Russ respond, and the Brad and Randall reports.
All right.
So,
yeah, excellent written material by Randall in those monthly newsletters. So yeah, sign up if you haven't.
Whatever
already.
else is going on.
You should promo your recent Joanna James interview and your upcoming interview with Rogan. By the time this comes out, they can look up the Rogan interview.
Yes, that's right. That Rogan interview is going to happen Friday. And definitely I imagine it's going to be up by this next weekend then.
Yep.
So.
Check the video description for links to things like that. I did realize I hardly use mobile for that kind of thing, but I did realize it is hard to find the description and those links if you're using a mobile device, but they're down there. Find the little arrow and jump down to them, and you can go right to these other maps and videos and Joe Rogan's and Johanna James. And yep, I put them all in there.
Good. Yeah, because we did, our last episode was a live event with Johanna James joining us. And that was very, very much fun.
Our next live should be out before, probably will be out before this is actually out. So
true.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right.
So we will have seen you in Texas, and
that's right.
Maybe sunburned or ice damaged, one or the other.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to be
thrust into a portal from hell.
That's right. We have plenty of those here.
Thrust through the adamantine bulwarks of hell.
There you go. That's it.
Yeah.
All right, randallcarlson.com. Sign up for the newsletter. Check out the trips. All of that's available on the website. Thank you guys so much. Great show, Randall.
Thanks, everybody.
Great stuff.
See you next time.
Enjoyed it. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Adios.